Sound good? Any other questions about the final exam?
One final one that might be asinine, but so it's just those two sections, the terms and the impact, and then the essays, correct?
That's right. So that's the whole exam, and then normally what I do is you can, if I ask you to write full identifications, you can write an additional identification to count as extra credit. So there's lots of different opportunities to be able to write about the things that you're most familiar with. So feel free to send me an email and touch base with me. The main thing is that it is this Thursday, which is very soon. Normally it's a week later, but this is, like I said, this is a hybrid class, and so technically we meet Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so our exam ends up being on the Thursday part of the spectrum. And make sure that you're here at 1 o'clock. It should be 1 o'clock in this room on Thursday. And I am going to do my best to get the papers and exams out of the way as quickly as possible so that you'll be able to finalize anything that's missing from your course grade, including any reversible deductions on your essays. The ultimate deadline for all late papers and resubmissions for reversible deductions is on the 26th. So just to be clear, reversible deductions refers to on the images essay and on your research essay, there are certain things that I count off for, but you can get those points back. So you just have to fix those things and resubmit your paper, and those will be clearly marked. If you have reversible deductions, it will be marked on the My Grades page, and it will be marked on the cover sheet on the PDF. So you'll be able to know that you have those points, and you'll be able to retrieve them and add to your overall grade. Any other questions? I know some people are sick, and some people are probably, working on all kinds of papers. But I'd hoped that this is the last class. Maybe he'll tell all the secrets in the last class, but would compel a little bit stronger attendance. It's been a weird semester, anyway.
One question, sorry.
Yeah.
About the attendance, how do you take the attendance? Based on the discussion board, or?
Yeah, there isn't a the classroom attendance is not a component of the grades. So participation in the online discussion goes towards your overall course grade, but not class attendance. Probably that was a mistake, but anyway. So we were talking about the Romans. Let me just finish talking about the Romans real quick. We were talking about the nature of the Roman understanding of the gods, which is that they were very closely connected to the strength and viability of the city of Rome. And so they saw the gods as participating in the successes of Rome and being enraged about Rome's failures, which the Romans were inclined to assume were down to things that had caused the gods to be angry. People had done to cause the gods to lash out against Rome and visit unto them, defeats in battle and pestilence and famine and so forth. And so the Romans were obsessive about ensuring that they could communicate with the gods, that they could, that they were able to acquire the gods' approval before taking any action. And this became very early on a critical component of the Roman system, that the gods must be consulted, and that the gods would communicate. Would let the Romans know when there was a problem through the ways in which the Romans consulted them and through messages that the gods sent of their own volition. This is a little bit unusual. We don't see this quite as much in the religions that we've talked about so far. There's been a lot of different ways of approaching the gods and trying to seek their opinions about things. Different forms of divination and so forth, but less about fewer examples of the gods, unilaterally communicating with mortals. Anyone think of any examples of the gods unilaterally communicating with people in other cultures?
What does it mean?
If examples of where the gods choose to speak to mortals without, in divination, it's, mortals seek and ask questions of the gods, and the gods respond.
Like different way, like not in like directly, but like different ways, different
Right.
answer.
Right. Yes. No, but so there's two kinds of phenomena here. One is where the Romans talk to the gods and the gods respond, and there's also situations where the gods just get upset about something and send the Romans a message. They send them omens and let them know that there's a problem. Like I said, this is unusual, but the example that I'm thinking of is prophets. If you want to think of prophets in Syria, Palestine, and amongst the Jews and Israelis, prophets are a means of the gods speaking directly to the people when the gods choose to. But still a little bit more interactive because it involves a sort of rapport between the prophet and the god. The Romans expected the gods to just get upset about something and send a message, to send a lightning bolt to hit a very significant tombstone, or send a vulture to crap upon the Senate House. Something like that. It sends an unmistakable message that the gods are angry. As I mentioned, there's a number of ways in which the Romans communicate with the gods. One is through the Etruscan method of consulting the entrails of animals. Another is through the Roman method of watching the skies and looking for portents, looking for the movements of different birds and other celestial phenomena. It's a very systematic and complex discipline that the Romans developed. And the augurs, the special priests that conducted this, were the final arbiters of the words of the gods. They could prevent things from happening. They could cause magistrates to have to resign if the augurs found that this magistrate had been elected under a ceremony that was performed incorrectly. The magistrate would have to resign. Augury was at the very center of the Roman system because the gods had to be consulted. There would be a regular recording of different kinds of omens, which would be messages like lightning strikes and unexpected hailstorms, and also prodigies, things that emerge in the natural world that are unnatural, like two-headed cows and this kind of thing. And we have this is diligently recorded by the priests of every year, some of which is retained in the Roman histories. The Romans also had a set of prophetic books. So instead of relying upon an oracle like the Greeks had at the Oracle of Delphi, the Romans had a set of prophetic books that were given to the last king of the Romans. And these books were, the books themselves were not of Roman origin. They came to the Romans, via the Sibyl of Cumae, somebody that was not even a Roman goddess, but had developed all these prophecies about the distant future of the gods of the Romans and the means of ensuring that the gods were happy. And these set of books were so important that there were a college of 12 priests whose sole job was to protect these books and to consult them in an emergency so extreme that there was no other, ordinary means of resolving it. And when the Romans hit a crisis that seemed to imperil their very existence, the thing that they would do is consult the Sibylline books, because it would give them an emergency ritual that covered how to make the gods happy in this specific situation. The story of how the Romans got the Sibylline books is kind of funny. The legend goes, and this legend can be taken with a grain of salt, but the legend goes that the priestess of Cumae brought the books to King Tarquin and offered to sell them to him at an outrageous price. And King Tarquin, this is before the Romans had expelled their kings and abolished the monarchy. This is the last king of the Romans before they instituted the Republic. King Tarquin was offended by the price and vehemently denied that he would pay such a thing, and told her to be on her way. And so the priestess then took half of the book and burned it in the fire near at hand, and offered them the remaining half to the king at the same price. And the king still refused, so she took another portion of the book and burned that, and offered the remaining portion to the king at the same price. And now the king was so intrigued that he had to buy the book. And so this book, this set of books, remained at the center of the Roman means of ensuring the satisfaction of the gods when all other mechanisms failed. The Romans also ensured the happiness of the gods in advance. Everything is about ensuring that the gods are happy with Roman actions. And one of the main ways of doing this would be by vowing gifts to the Roman gods. And these would be primarily of two kinds. Either they would vow a temple that would be built and dedicated to a particular god. So that, for example, before the Battle of Lake Regillus, the general Servius Albus vowed that he would build and dedicate a temple to Castor and Pollux, and this temple was built and sanctified after this battle, and became a centerpiece of the Roman Forum. It was a marking point for all of the things that grew up around it at the very heart of Rome. Especially if the battle is dire and Roman chances look uncertain, the general before the battle will vow a temple to a god, or will vow games and celebration. The Romans, you may have heard of the Roman practice of bread and circuses to keep the people happy. But the thing that's one of the things that's fascinating about the Romans is that the games that they celebrated, things like gladiator matches and chariot races and so forth, these games were sacred. They were meant to be entertainments for the divine citizens, for the gods that were partaking of the life of Rome. And so these communal games were very serious business. They had to be inaugurated in a certain way with a set of spoken rituals that had to be conducted in exactly the right manner. And they alongside, we've seen festivals, we've seen processions in other communities. This is a particularly Roman way of ensuring the pleasure of the gods. And so, again, before a battle or some other great emergency, the Roman leadership might vow that games would be celebrated in honor of a particular god, in honor of Jupiter or in honor of Minerva or whoever, in order to ensure potentially favorable outcome. And so because the gods are thought of as being an integral part of Rome, to be Roman is to be connected with these gods. This also means that the Roman religion doesn't really export beyond the city of Rome. The Roman religion belongs to the physical space of Rome. And so, as a result, as the Roman dominion expands, the Roman religion does not expand with it. The Roman religion is like Roman citizenship. It is attached to, it is imbued in the physical space of Rome, in Rome's sacred boundaries.
That's actually really interesting.
It is, right?
It is, because usually when you expand your territory, you would expand your religion as well.
Right. Well, part of the reason for that is that the Romans are also aware that if you try to directly impose culture onto the people that you're ruling over, it can lead to resistance, especially in the nature of local religion, which people hold on to very closely as a matter of identity. And so the Romans are more interested in developing an economic connection and a cultural connection for the people that they rule over, to see Rome as the cultural and economic center of the world, and to become, to gain the advantage of being connected to Rome in that way. And we'll talk a little bit more about how religion goes in the empire. But for the city of Rome, the Romans are patriotic about their gods belonging to them and want that relation to be excluded. They don't want Jupiter to pay attention to any other people. They want Jupiter and Mars to be as exclusive as Roman citizenship. They don't give out citizenship to others. And they don't give out their gods either. And of course this means that because the state must consult the gods before taking any action, this means that the people that do the consulting of the gods hold immense political power. And essentially the political structure of Rome and the religious authority of Rome is the same people. The Senate is originally made up of the priests who advised the kings on matters of religion, on matters of how to ensure that the gods are well taken care of. Later on, the elected officials are added to this. The consuls and the praetors became members of the Senate. But in order to be a consul, one of the part of the job of being a consul is to make emergency consultations of the sky, to conduct the auspices. To be a consul meant that you had to consult the gods. And that meant that the consulship was kept in the families that controlled the priesthoods. The families that controlled the priesthoods controlled Rome. And even later on, when the other families fought to gain access to the consulship, it still meant gaining access to that religious authority, to the ability to take the auspices. Even when Roman power expanded beyond the small number of families that controlled the priesthood to a larger group of families halfway through the Republic, even when that happened, even when it expanded beyond the priestly families, Roman political authority still involved the ability to consult the gods. Roman political authority and religious authority was still the same. And when we get to the emperors, the emperors, starting with Augustus, are able to control the machinery of government because built into that office is the title of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest and the controller of the state religion. Augustus is only able to be emperor, the first citizen of Rome, because he controls the religious authority, because he controls the state religion. Because still, even when we have somebody like Augustus cannot act without first consulting the gods. The Romans import a number of gods and cults into their religion. Not only do the Romans not expand Roman religion, but other religions are grafted onto the Roman religion. Other cults are added to the Roman system. Why would the Romans do that? Why would the Romans import foreign gods into their system? Yeah.
Like you had said before, the importing other cults would be a way of them filling like the gaps in their own religion or making it better, or just their own culture in general.
Right, it's a way of ensuring that they can survive in some way through something that they're missing, through some capacity, through some god, through some means of ensuring a positive divine relationship in some situation, whether it's in terms of a growing population of outsiders who need representation in the pantheon, or in terms of some emergency that requires the expansion of the pantheon in order to survive. During the war with Hannibal, a number of things happen when it looks like Rome is going to be destroyed by Hannibal, and the Romans are in a panic. And one of the things that they do is consult the Sibylline books and conduct a number of very extreme sacrifices and citywide prayers and so forth. It's dictated by the Sibylline books of prophecy. And they also import a goddess from Anatolia called the Magna Mater, the Great Mother, to reaffirm Rome's commitment to the divine and to add a sympathetic power among the gods. The Romans also, yeah.
Wouldn't that be considered heresy from their gods to import a foreign god? Basically, they would basically be the gods had to be you're about to replace us.
But that's the point, though, is that they're not being replaced because they're filling a gap that their current gods are not satisfying. And the Romans see their gods as a community that is interactive and collectively positive toward each other. So they see the gods as not jealous of each other. They're collectively concerned about the city of Rome. Another example of bringing outside gods in is when the Romans attack the nearby Etruscan city of Veii, and they call upon the gods of Veii to come over to the Roman side and abandon the people of Veii who had dealt falsely with the Romans and were not worthy of their gods. And so the Romans conducted a ceremony that was deemed to be a success, and the gods of Veii, two particular gods, abandoned Veii and were inducted into the Roman pantheon, representing an Etruscan aspect, representing the way in which Rome had added on to itself and the lands that they had acquired. That these two Etruscan gods represent. The Romans also added mortals to the pantheon. In the case of the founder of Rome, Romulus, was, according to legend, inducted into the heavens and made to be one of the gods of Rome, a minor god to be sure, but he had his own cult, he had his own priests, he had his own festivals. Julius Caesar, after he died, was considered to have been deified and gained his own priests and his own cult and his own rituals. And Augustus, who was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, referred to himself as the son of the divine Julius. And Augustus, in his turn, also was inducted into heaven. There's a very famous story about this in which at Augustus' funeral there was a funeral pyre, and his wife Livia had placed a cage in the middle of the funeral pyre that held an eagle. And a rope was attached to the door of the cage, and the eagle was supposed to fly loose at a moment after the pyre had been lit, and it was supposed to be Augustus' spirit ascending into heaven, apotheosis, and everybody was supposed to be able to witness Augustus actually ascending into heaven. But the problem was that after the pyre was lit, the door stuck. And the poor centurion, whose job it was to tug on the rope, it wasn't working, and the assembled populace started to hear the eagle screaming as the fires came closer, and the centurion had to climb up onto the pyre and yank open the door and throw the eagle up into the air. But Livia still said that this was always meant to be a symbolic representation of the obvious apotheosis of Augustus, and the fact that his spirit truly had ascended, and Augustus was considered to be God afterwards, in spite of this.
You look a bad person blocking.
Yes. There's a lot. The Romans love to tell stories about it. The Romans are, in some ways, very sardonic about their own history. The Romans also added very powerful gods that did not that represented something that was not present in the Pantheon. So the Magna Mater is one of these. But the most famous example is Isis. As the Romans gained control over Egypt, Isis was developing into a sort of a broad mystery cult throughout, that part of the Roman Empire. And, Isis spoke to a particular need, represented a kind of goddess the Romans didn't have. That was both, empowered and independent, and was able to represent a portion of the Roman community that was not being represented. And so Isis was, instead of the cult being suppressed, Isis was grafted onto the Roman pantheon.
I believe it mentions that in the very first reading we had.
Did I? Yes. So we've come full circle, very appropriate. So the result is that as Rome governs its empire, it tends to leave local religion alone. It's only when the Roman Empire itself is in danger of falling apart during a period of crisis known as the 3rd century crisis that the Romans start trying to develop a universal religion that can bring some level of stability, that can bring some unity. And there are a couple of different options. One is a god called Sol Invictus. This is an attempt to create sort of a universal cult built around a particular incarnation of the sun. So, a little reminiscent of Akhenaten, right, in Egypt, where we have the one thing that everybody has in common that they can focus on is the sun. And so it's used once again as a means of unification. But the cult of Sol Invictus doesn't take off because people don't like the Romans imposing religion on them. Emperor worship is something that temples are built to the idea of the Roman emperor in various parts of the provinces, never in Rome itself, but in the provinces there might be temples to the idea of the Augustus. But this was so tied up in the Roman identity that it didn't fulfill the local need to express their own heritage. And so what came to develop out of that is the appeal of Christianity, because Christianity managed to find a way to be both local and universal, which we'll talk about. And so this brings us to the reading from last week, which is the driving of the nail, a particular ritual which is very characteristic of the Romans, because it's so primeval and ancient, but and yet was taken very seriously by the Romans, in much later times, so that they would be appointing dictators to drive the nail, centuries after it had been first used, and nobody remembered, how it was originally done, or it was an arcane ritual even to them, but it was done to fix a particular catastrophe in place, so that it could not escape. Anybody have any reactions to the driving of the nail reading? Anything that stood out to you guys as being interesting or unexpected about the driving of the nail? It's a very specific thing, so it's telling us about how the Romans used ritual in a sort of in a civic way. In other words, the crisis that the Romans were facing when this ritual was revived in 363 BCE, the crisis that they were facing was a citywide plague that had been going on for 3 years. And so this is a very civic problem, but the solution had to be appeasement of the gods. And, they tried a whole bunch of different things. And eventually some graybeard remembered that, that his grandfather had talked about some ritual that had been used, in times before anyone could remember. And they disinterred this ritual in a desperate effort to end the calamity, and it seemed to work. The plague died out, and so appointing a dictator in order to drive the nail, in order to pound an iron nail into the wall of the temple, in order to end a calamity, especially pestilence, became a mechanism of resolving crisis. And there were at least 3 more dictators that were appointed in order to drive the nail. It's interesting even that it was a dictator that was appointed. This wasn't done by a priest. This was done by the highest possible civic official of the Roman state. Because, if it was done by the chief priest, that would represent the religious authority. That would represent the priestly colleges. But this communication with the gods had to be done on behalf of the entire Roman community. And so it had to be done by a Roman official. And it had to be done in order to underline the magnitude of the event, the seriousness of the situation. It had to be done by the official with the highest imperium. So they had to appoint a dictator for the purpose of conducting this brief but extremely important primitive ritual in order to save Rome from plague. Let's talk for a second about law and ethics, which is the other reading from last week, and then we'll talk about Christianity. So the main upshot of this reading is what's the standard way of thinking about morality in the ancient world? How do the people in the ancient world tend to define morality? If you're speaking to people in the ancient world, and you're looking at communities in general, what are they going to say is morality? What is it that determines what is right and wrong in ancient communities? And we're all thinking back very hard to this other reading from last week, and not necessarily, of course, if I had a quiz last week, then that would have been a question of the quiz, and it would have been a little bit more in the forefront of what we're thinking about. What I'm trying to get at is loyalty to the community and tradition is the common denominator. People see right and wrong as what reinforces the strength of the community. Or to put it another way, what is wrong, what is unjust, is anything that is destructive to the community. And we see this most of all in mythology, and in particular in Greek mythology. If you look at Greek mythology, if you look at Homer and Hesiod, what do the Greek gods punish? They punish people who are selfish, who are arrogant, who are prideful, who are destructive of their community.
People piss them off.
And the result is the idea of what is good, what is just, what is right and wrong, as a common denominator for the ancient world, are things that reinforce the strength of the community, that are beneficial. To a certain extent, this pertains to family, and so, but family is sort of a subset of the community, or you can say that family is a small community, and you're part of a larger family, a larger community. In this case, these ideas sort of overlap, but so the play Antigone, for example, the play Antigone involves a king who says that the heroine Antigone must not bury her brother, conduct religious burial rituals for her brother because he is a traitor. And the Antigone is determined to ensure that the gods are honored and the proper rituals are conducted, because to not do so will be destructive to her family and destructive to the community. And the play goes on to reinforce that message, that even though it's the law of the king has banned a particular action, what is truly just is what protects the community. And that supersedes arbitrary actions, even of kings. The king himself is being selfish, is being arrogant, is being emotional and reactive in denying his burial, and as a result, he is the one that is punished by the gods. And so this means that the God's task is to ensure that people's fates line up with the things that they've done. The interesting thing about this is that there's a consequence to this, which is that the nature of the gods is to be unlimited in power, except they have to do this thing. They have to, part of their role is as the managers of nature, as the arbiters of the raw power of the physical world. Part of their job as manifest in controlling these powers is ensuring the appropriate fate for moral and immoral mortals. And so, even this is fascinating, because the gods themselves are not bound by human morality. The gods themselves can do anything. But the gods don't have a choice about the reinforcement of human morality, about the reinforcement of human morality, because human morality is about the protection of the community, and the community represents the place that the gods are bound to. Pagan gods are local, they are bound to place. And the community of people that live in that place are therefore under the responsibility of the gods. And so, because the gods are bound to that place, and the humans are in that place, the gods are forced to act in a particular way. In terms of what we're talking about at the beginning of the course, the theologization of history, the way in which history is reshaped in the telling by loyalty to the gods. This means that the gods are understood to be acting through a chief god who is especially responsible for justice. And this is one of the things that helps to bring about evolutionary monotheism. So, for example, in Babylon, Marduk is particularly associated with the human rulers and with the imposition of justice. The connection between the mortal and the divine goes through Marduk, and this helps to reinforce the preeminence of Marduk. So eventually Marduk subsumes all of the other gods, and all the other gods become aspects of Marduk. And so, this is all bound together in the ways that we've seen the understanding of success in this world, and especially in the afterlife. A lot of places have a negative or meaningless afterlife, but if there's any possibility of a positive afterlife, like in Egypt or amongst the Hellenistic Greeks or something like that, if there's any possibility of a positive afterlife, then you need to adhere to tradition. You need to adhere to the community's idea of morality. The main thing that starts to question this is when the world becomes wider through the expansion of Greek ideas. And people become aware of how parochial and insular and constrained and different and conflicting all of these local ideas of morality are. And so there becomes a very strong effort to develop an independent set of ethics. And this is one of the reasons that philosophy becomes a thing, to try to determine how we know what is right and wrong without depending upon the gods, without depending upon the local tradition that might vary from one town to the next. The example I usually give is, if you're living in this one town, you might have forever thought that, since the days of your ancestors, that it's perfectly okay to take any babies that you have that happen to be extra lying around and put them on spikes and plant them outside of your town walls. And that's a great thing to do. But the next town, 100 miles down the road, thinks that it's terrible to take babies and put them on spikes and plant them outside. And because, local traditions are local, and local moralities are local. And in a wider world, a Hellenized world, it's necessary to transcend that, to develop some universal principles that are founded upon reason that apply to humanity. And we're still trying to figure that out today. So. All right, let's talk about Christianity. So there's this guy. This is not an actual, image of Jesus. Obviously, there are no images of Jesus that are at all anything like contemporary. The earliest images of Jesus that we have are from the 3rd century. So, hundreds of years later, obviously not likely to be of accurately reported. We have this problem with Christopher Columbus too, but at a much smaller scale. Christopher Columbus, all the paintings come from like 50 years later. Jesus of Nazareth, we have it's hundreds of years. But so this is from 15 years ago. Some scientists used artificial intelligence to create a composite average image of a Galilean citizen from roughly the time of Jesus' birth. His name would have been Yeshua, son of Joseph. Why do we call him Jesus? Anybody know? Where the name Jesus comes from? That's not this is his actual name. Yeah.
Wasn't it like a Greek translation or something like that?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It was so. In Greek, it would have been. It would have been Yesus, and because the Greeks didn't believe that any name could not have, all names had to have an S at the end. The Greeks couldn't deal with a name that didn't have an S at the end, so they took Yeshua and made it Yesus. And then in the Middle Ages, we invented the letter J. Because in the Middle Ages we couldn't deal with an I being a consonant, and so Yesus became Jesus. So it's entirely an example of how the story of Yeshua Bar Yosef has been filtered through the Greeks and the Romans to become something. Other than what he is. This is a prophet and a teacher, a charismatic who traveled Galilee and Nazareth and the Roman regions of Judea, speaking about the imminent reign of God and the need to prepare for this through compassion and non-violence. But the key component of this is the reign of God. This is explicitly apocalyptic. The original core of Christianity is about eschatology. Is about the end of human control over affairs. That God, and he's a Jewish man, so he's speaking about the Jewish God Yahweh. Yahweh would exert rule over humanity, and this would bring with it a judgment. And so, as a result, there's a great deal of emphasis on the afterlife, on the nature of the soul, so that because this apocalypse would bring judgment with it, the judgment of the soul, there's a great deal of emphasis on the soul and ensuring that it is prepared for the hereafter. And then Jesus is crucified, we are told. I say we are told because there are no records. The Romans we do not have any non-Christian sources about the death of Yeshua Bar Yosef. The stories that we have involve elements that we do know to be true. Pontius Pilate was the governor of the Roman province of Judea at the time, and there were conflicts with the local Jewish leadership that would lead relatively soon to an enormous war with the Jews in the year 66. So only 30 years later after the crucifixion. What we do know about crucifixion is a standard Roman means of executing traitors. And someone who set themselves up to be a leader of the Jews in defiance of Rome would have been tried as an insurrectionist and would have been executed most likely by crucifixion. Crucifixion was a very standard means of executing somebody that had to die in a public and humiliating way. Anybody think of any other famous Roman rebels that were killed by crucifixion? Spartacus, thank you very much. Spartacus and all his followers. So Crassus not only crucified Spartacus, but he erected crosses all the way down the Appian Way from southern Italy to Rome, so that the travelers would see, anybody traveling that road would see all of the dying bodies of the Spartan rebels. But the crucifixion had a tremendous impact. The fact that Jesus was crucified, and the detail in one of the stories says that there was a sign over his head that this is Jesus, King of the Jews, which is what it says here, Rex Judei, King of the Jews, is one of those authentic elements. But the fact that Jesus is crucified allows him to be seen as a sacrifice by all of humanity. Local communities and families have been sacrificing since the beginning of time. And the Abraham story had made sacrifice of his son a massively symbolic moment. Now, God is sacrificing His Son in order to redeem humanity, and so this is made the basis of the new covenant, a new agreement of mutual responsibility between God and those who accept that Jesus Christ was sacrificed on behalf of humanity. There's a lot of things about Christianity that are different from what we've seen before. What's characteristic about Christianity that's different from what we've seen in all the other religions we've been looking at? What's unusual? What's unique about Christianity? Yeah.
Well, being that there's only supposed to be one God, the divination methods or how they relate to that God is like less than other pagan religions or polytheistic religions.
Right, that we don't have standardized means of divination with the Christian God. We only have prayer. And because the Christian God is the Old Testament God who everybody knows to be kind of a bastard, increasingly over time, the prayers go to figures that can intercede with God, who will be more compassionate than God himself. So at first it's directed to Jesus, but Jesus is a part of God. And so people start to pray to Jesus' mother, who is thought of as, sitting beside God, Jesus in heaven, and being more infinitely compassionate than everyone else. And then eventually by the Middle Ages we get the whole array of saints that people are praying to saints to intercede with God rather than to God. So divination is not really a thing, and so how does the Christian God speak to his followers? Through Scripture, right? Through Scripture and the occasional miracle, and the emergence of new saints who sort of take the role of prophets, but mostly saints aren't about speaking the Word of God because the Word of God is contained in the Scriptures. So saints mostly end up performing miraculous acts or are martyrs who have died on behalf of Christianity. What else is different about Christianity? There's anything that strikes us as being we're so used to Christianity in this world. Try to think about, try to picture yourself as someone from the ancient world, a Greek or a Roman, who's hearing about Christianity for the first time. And you're thinking, what the heck are you talking about? What's different about Christianity? Yeah.
I don't think this particularly makes it unique, but I guess the openness for followers, there's not like status restrictions.
Right, yeah, no, that very much is unusual. Pagan religions are local, and so they tend to contain people that belong to a local community. Judaism is ethnic, and so the members of Judaism belong to a particular ethnicity. Christianity is different because after its early crisis over this, it begins expanding into multiple ethnicities, multiple classes of people, multiple genders, multiple nationalities, people of all different origins and backgrounds become seed appeal Christianity, become a part of this movement. Although there is another phenomenon that we have touched upon that's similar to this, which is mystery cults. Certain mystery cults end up bringing together people from all different parts of the community and outsiders and so forth. Christianity is a mystery cult on a massive scale. Anything else that's different about Christianity? All right, I'll give you my bullet points. How about that? So the first thing that occurs to me as I'm thinking about this is the Trinity. The fact that this is and I mentioned this before, but it's extremely odd that this is a monotheistic religion that has one God. But that one God is three gods. Or more accurately, the Christian God has three aspects. So, what this actually reminds me, though, is what I was just saying about Marduk. About how evolutionary monotheism brings about a single core deity that has swallowed up all the other gods. All the other gods are still there, but they are agents of a single centralized will. That's how evolutionary... Now, Christianity comes about through revolutionary monotheism. It comes about as through Judaism as a rejection of pagan beliefs.
What God is not, it should not.
What God is not, exactly.
That's one of the terms I'm studying.
Very good. Yeah, it's a good one because it's like a bumper sticker. It's very 50 years from now you'll think, what is revolutionary? What God is not? It'll be the and I will have done my job. But you can think about the Trinity in terms of Marduk subsuming all the other gods. You can think about the Trinity in terms of the way that Greek gods have different aspects, like Athena, the virgin, and Athena, the victorious. All of those different aspects of Zeus that in which Zeus performed different roles. And this is the Christian God performing different roles. God the Father is there to exert justice. God the Son is there to redeem humanity. and the Holy Spirit is there to inspire humanity. It's different functional roles. So very close to the pagan idea of aspects, epithets. The divinity of Christ, the fact that we have a mortal man who actually lived and walked the earth, but who is considered to be a god. That is, that is revolutionary. Although, can we think of any other mortals who were thought of as being gods elsewhere in the ancient world? Yeah. Gilgamesh was supposed to be half divine, so you look at somebody like Gilgamesh, somebody like Perseus, people who are the children of gods and mortals, Nephilim in Jewish tradition. Yes.
I'm going to go with the obvious, Egypt.
Egypt, the kings of Egypt were thought to be manifestations of the gods. And I just mentioned how Romulus was a mortal that walked the earth, but was thought of as being taken up into heaven. So the idea of apotheosis, of a mortal being accepted into heaven and made into a god. This even happens in some traditions to Hercules.
That's right.
Certainly gives us the end of the Disney movie, but so the divinity of Christ is very. That's a nice juxtaposition of Disney, Hercules, and Christ. The divinity of Christ does have some precedence, but it's still a very distinctive element of Christianity. The diversity of membership we talked about. The emphasis on the afterlife and the apocalypse. Most places in the ancient world had a neutral or negative afterlife, where it was understood that your involvement with the divine ends with your death, and so it's necessary to ensure that you accomplish all that you can during your time on earth. Christianity, because its first principle is the imminent reign of God, the apocalypse and judgment that happens as a part of that. From a very early stage, it becomes associated with the soul in the afterlife, and by the time we get to the Middle Ages, Christianity is all about the salvation of the soul and ensuring that your position in the afterlife is better than it is on earth. And finally, the diversity of membership also brings about a unique characteristic, which is evangelism, the deliberate attempt to spread Christianity beyond the immediate local community. By the way, we're looking at a fish here because that's the original symbol of Christianity. The cross came much later. Cross would have been very weird to use in Roman times. It would be like, if Texans wore a necklace with an electric chair. So yeah, it's a method of execution. So early Christians used the fish, partly in reference to the miracle of the loaves and fishes, but it's also an acrostic. It stands for Jesus, son of. It stands for how you spell a fish in Greek. Has an acrostic too. Early Christianity is local, isolated local communities. People meeting together in these local houses, and what this means is that the local liturgy and ceremony is non-standard. They tended to gather together and do certain things. They tended to have a meal that mimicked the Last Supper, and they would have prayers and look at writings. But the communion, the Eucharist, the meal where you take of the body and blood of Christ, was done differently in every community. These are isolated local versions of Christianity. And there's no canonical scripture, even though the Christianity is dependent upon the written word. No, there's no central authority until much later to decide what words everybody should be looking at. So in different places, people are looking at different gospels, different letters, and so forth. None of that gets standardized until it becomes the Roman state religion in the 4th century. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, where did the position of Pope come from?
The position of the Pope comes from the rise of the bishops, and the Pope was originally just the Bishop of Rome, and there were originally 5 cities in which the bishops were particularly important, and they became patriarchs of the church. But when the Roman Empire divided into East and West, there was only one of these patriarchs in the West. And so the Bishop of Rome became the sole patriarch for all of the Western Roman Empire.
Holy Roman Empire.
Well, and the Holy Roman Empire, but even during the regular Western Christian Empire, it was just the Bishop of Rome. And then the Eastern Empire got swallowed up by the Muslims. And so the short version is there was a schism between East and West, and the Pope claimed to be the sole arbiter of the Word of God. So all these different forms of writings, including lives of saints, called hagiography, the emergence of bishops, and then because of all this localness and because there was disagreement about how to understand what it is to be Christian, there were all of these different sects. So there were different disagreements about doctrines. Some said that people had to reject the Old Testament God and embrace only Jesus as being more compassionate. Some said that the clergy needed to be pure and free from sin. There were massive disagreements over the nature of Christ. The end result of all of these disagreements is that there's a need to create orthodoxy. And as a result of that, there was an effort to create an orthodox version of Christianity, and this became a final reunification of the religious authority of the Roman Empire with its political authority, when Theodosius made Christianity the religion of the empire. And that's all I have time for. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting semester, and I've had a lot of fun talking about religion with all of you. So email me with any questions about the final exam, and I will see you on Thursday at 1 o'clock.